How's it going? I'm Brandon Lee, and this is going to be a video about anamorphic lenses. So the lenses I'm going to talk about here come from a company called Laowa, and Laowa basically makes impossible lenses that you never thought anyone could ever create. And the latest challenge that they put themselves up to is miniaturizing anamorphic lenses and also making them more affordable for the average user. So these are the Nanomorph series. They actually started this series a couple of years ago. There's already several focal lengths that you can buy, but the latest ones that I'm going to talk about today are the 80mm T2.4 and the 65mm T2.4. And these lenses are both for APS-C sensors, and they have a constant 1.5x squeeze, which is consistent with the rest of the Nanomorph line of lenses. So you can use all of the Nanomorphs together as a kit. I'm also going to be talking about this 1.33x adapter. So this hunk of glass here is an adapter that you put on the front of these anamorphic lenses, and that gives you an overall squeeze factor of 2x, which is considered the true anamorphic look. Without this, you only have 1.5x, but with this, you have the full 2x squeeze. So I will be talking about this adapter a little bit later. And for full disclosure, Laowa did send me these lenses for evaluation, but I am not sponsored, and everything I'm going to say about the lenses is my own opinion. So let's go ahead and talk about the 65 and the 80mm lenses. First of all, these lenses are available in several mounts. They're available for Canon RF, Sony E, Micro Four Thirds, L mount, Nikon Z, DJI DL, and Fujifilm X. These lenses are both a constant aperture of T2.4. They have a minimum focus distance of 0.7 meters, and they have standard focus gears and aperture gears so that you can manually control them. The filter thread size of both is 62 millimeters. And one cool feature is that you can choose the color of lens flare for your lenses. So you can either choose amber lens flare, or blue lens flare, or neutral lens flare. I chose neutral for the samples that I tested here, so that's what you'll be seeing in my footage. So first of all, let's get some technicals out of the way. How do these lenses work? Well, an anamorphic lens squeezes your image in camera, and then you de-squeeze it in post, and that gives you a wider than normal image that also retains some interesting and unique characteristics from that squeezing process. So you tend to get oval bokeh in the background, you get stretched out lens flares that go all the way across the screen, and you of course get a wider final image. And there's also some more subtle characteristics of anamorphic lenses that make them feel a little bit more magical. You get sort of the feeling of having two focal lengths in one. It's sort of like taking a spherical lens and then just adding more screen real estate on the sides of the image. And you overall get a wider aspect with the same compression of a slightly more telephoto lens. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. You have less distortion of your subject, and you also have a wider image so you can get more in the frame. So that's what gives anamorphic lenses that sort of slightly fantastical image, slightly less real, and it helps to create the suspension of disbelief when you're watching a movie, because the world shot through anamorphic doesn't look as clinically real as the world shot through a spherical lens. And it may not even be a conscious thing that the audience notices, but it does help them to cross that barrier into the fictional world that you're trying to create. So the reason I wanted to personally test these lenses is because I usually shoot in very small crews or even as a solo shooter, and I'm always trying to keep my kit as small and compact as possible, especially because I do a lot of my shooting on a gimbal. And these Nanomorphs are actually great for mounting on gimbals because of the compact size. Here I've mounted up this 65mm lens on my DJI RS3 Mini gimbal, and you can see the gimbal is not even breaking a sweat, even though this is a smaller gimbal and it's not actually made for very high weight capacities. But I'm still able to get smooth shots, and I could add a filter on the front if I want. I still have some extra room to move this whole assembly back and balance it for a filter. And now I've switched it out for the 80mm lens, which is just a bit more front heavy. I had to move the camera back just a little bit, but otherwise I still had no problem balancing it up, and I can still maneuver just fine with the RS3 Mini. So both of these lenses are gimbal friendly. If you are using a bigger gimbal, you'll probably have no problem adding in a focus motor, so then you can pull manual focus either on the gimbal or remotely. All right, so now let's talk about this 1.33x front adapter. So what this does is it turns the 1.5x squeeze of the lenses into a full 2x squeeze. So the 1.33x squeezes the image a little bit more so that you get the full 2x anamorphic squeeze. That gives you more characteristics of the anamorphic image, and it should make it look more distinctly different from a spherical lens. You also end up with a wider image. So to use this adapter, you just screw it onto the front of the lens, like I'm doing now, just like any other filter. And then you have to line up the Laowa logo on the top of the adapter with the Laowa logo on your lens. And here's one thing I wish was a little bit more precise, because I don't have any actual markers to use to get this alignment just right. The importance of lining up these two logos is so that the bokeh is perfectly straight up and down. If you had this out of alignment and slightly crooked, then you'd actually get diagonal bokeh in your image, which of course nobody wants. And I don't know why this adapter doesn't just lock in place. I think maybe it's because different lenses might require it to be screwed in and adapted slightly differently in order to get that bokeh in just the right place. I don't know, but this is something that you have to be very aware of. So once you've got your adapter on your lens, it becomes a giant beast. This is no longer a super small compact lens, and I would no longer be able to mount it on my mini gimbal. In order to focus, once you've attached the adapter, you adjust your lens's focus to infinity, and then you manually focus using the adapter instead. So you no longer focus with the lens at all, you just leave it at infinity. And then you turn the ring on the adapter in order to focus. And your minimum focus distance does not change that much, 0.73 meters. That's your minimum focus, 0.73 meters. So your minimum focus is just a little bit further out with the 1.33x adapter attached. Also, I wasn't able to use any of the filters that I own on the 1.33x adapter because it has an 86mm filter thread, which I just don't have any filters for. It's bigger than the filters that I own. So be aware that if you're planning on using the 1.33x, you may have to get bigger filters for it. Now, before I get into the sample footage, there's something you need to know. I shot everything on my A7S III camera, which is a full frame camera, and these are APS-C lenses. So technically speaking, these lenses won't cover the full image circle of a full frame camera. Now, these lenses do actually have a larger coverage than a standard 16:9 APS-C sensor, which is why I went ahead and did this test with my full frame camera. So in my sample footage, you will see more distortion and more vignetting toward the edges of the shots in some cases, especially when using the 1.33x adapter. So I took these lenses out for several test shoots, and I'll give you some of my thoughts right now. I really enjoyed shooting with the lenses without the adapter, and I was able to mount them on a gimbal quite easily and move around freely. And as for the look of the 1.5x lenses, I really can't complain. Very clean, very sharp, very modern look. I didn't see a lot of optical flaws. And honestly, I was kind of hoping to have a few more flaws and a little bit more character in the image. I was hoping for maybe a little bit of chromatic aberration, or maybe some easier flaring, or maybe some vignetting in the corners, something that tells the audience that yes, I am shooting anamorphic. Because the look of these 1.5x lenses is not that much different than the look of a spherical lens that has been cropped for the wider aspect ratio. There is, of course, a definite noticeable difference if you're looking for it, but it's not as obvious as it would have been if I was using 2x anamorphics. And speaking of flare, I actually had a really hard time getting these lenses to flare at all. I seem to remember that with the other nanomorphs that I've tried out, the flaring came a lot more easily. I saw a lot more streaks in my image when I pointed them toward light sources. But with these, even when pointing them straight toward the sun, I barely saw a noticeable flare in my image. Now, when I added the 1.33x adapter, everything changed. Suddenly, I had tons of anamorphic character. I had a lot of chromatic aberration. I had a lot of softening toward the edges of the image, vignetting, everything that I could want from an anamorphic lens, and maybe more than I would want. I noticed that it was often difficult to get critical focus. It was often difficult to notice where my image was sharply in focus, especially if I was focused nearer to infinity. And when I was focused out further, I did notice a sort of strange distortion to the image. It wasn't quite a pincushion and it wasn't quite a fisheye distortion. It was something sort of in between, or like a mix of the two. And I think it's because it's combining the distortion of the 1.5x lenses with additional distortion from the 1.33x adapter, which gives you just some crazy complex distortion. So you may be wondering, how did I monitor my image so that I could see my framing and get my focus when it was stretched out in that anamorphic way? Because the A7S III does not have de-squeezing in camera. In other words, you can't take your anamorphic image and stretch it back out to look normal in camera. That's just not something the camera offers. So what I did was, first of all, I looked on the LCD and I just guessed some of the time. And other times I used my phone connected to the camera, and on my phone was the Monitor Plus app. This is a third-party app that has an anamorphic de-squeezing feature. So you can take that image that comes out of your camera and you can de-squeeze it in the app, and then you see exactly what you're shooting. Okay, so what are my final thoughts on these Nanomorph lenses from Laowa? Well, first of all, I really enjoyed shooting with them, as I always do with anamorphics, because they have that special movie character. The image just always comes out looking a little more cinematic than it would with the spherical lens. And the 1.5 lenses are especially clear and clean in the image. They're very easy to use. So these lenses are very good for run and gun shooters. I don't think I would use the 1.33x adapter all the time. I think for my shoots, I'd probably just use it for specialty shots where I was shooting a close-up subject and the subject was toward the center of the frame. But overall, if you really want to get into anamorphic shooting and you don't have the budget for the big boy lenses and you also don't want to carry around huge heavy glass with you everywhere you go, then these are a really great option to consider, and I love the look of them. So thank you for watching, and thanks to Laowa for letting me try out these lenses. And if you want to learn more about the lenses, please click the links in the description. Also, you will find links to my film school, Unscripted Studio, where you can learn directly from me and learn how I make the films that I make. So go ahead and click like, subscribe, and that notification bell so you find out the next time I post a video. I'll see you again soon.